Past week, there's been a little bit of drama. And the main question is, who owns the value created around a decentralized protocol? The team building the product or the community governing it? Last week, that became a $10 million question. And the answer might reshape how every major crypto project thinks about the relationship between their core team and their DAO. This is the story of Aave, CowSwap, and a governance forum post that exposed one of the most uncomfortable tensions in all of DeFi. So let's get into it. What happened? Quick background, Aave is one of the largest lending protocols in DeFi, around 34 billion in total value locked. And they've been around since 2017, governed by a DAO where token holders vote on protocol changes and treasury spending. Then there's Aave Labs, the company founded by Stani Kulichov, Aave's original creator. They're the primary developers and run the main front end at aave.com. On December 4th, Aave Labs announced a partnership with CowSwap to power swaps on the Aave interface. Better MEV protection, improved execution. Sounds like a straightforward upgrade. A week later, though, a delegate named Ezreal published an investigation, and what he found raised some serious questions in the DAO. Aave's interface has had swap functionality for years, previously powered by Paraswap, with a referral program where any surplus from trades would flow to the DAO treasury, about $200,000 to $250,000 per quarter, roughly $1 million a year. With the new CowSwap integration, Ezreal discovered swap fees were now flowing to a different address, not to the DAO treasury, an address controlled by Aave Labs. He traced the transactions, did the math, and estimated the DAO could be missing out on $10 million or more annually under this new fee structure. There's a little bit of debate on that, but that's what he said. There was no governance vote, no announcement. The community found out through on-chain forensics. Some important context. The Aave protocol generates around 112 million in annual revenue from its core operations. Borrowing fees, liquidations, flash loans. That's what token holders control through governance, and that is untouched. The swap fees are separate. So this isn't existential to Aave token value. This isn't the end or something tragic, but it surfaced something bigger, a fundamental ambiguity about who owns what, and where the protocol ends and the product begins. So the DAO's concerns. The community raised several concerns, and they're not just about money. First, process. The DAO found out after the fact, no heads up, no forum post. Delegates who thought they were paying attention to what was going on had no idea. Second, it's a brand question. When Aave Labs monetizes features using that brand, built on that trust, who's really capturing the value? Thirdly, contribution history. Some swap contracts were actually built by BGD Labs, a DAO-funded service provider. The Paraswap debt swap adapter, for example, well, that's BGD's work, published on their GitHub. Other teams contributed pull requests believing that they were building for the DAO. Mark Zeller from the ACI put it this way: "It seems we have been fooled in considering this a natural alignment." Those are some pretty hard words. Fourth, there's also a competition angle. CowSwap solvers frequently use balancers flash loans, which are fee-free instead of Aave's. So the DAO is potentially losing twice, swap fees and flash loan revenue. Fifth, precedent. If this can happen with swaps, what about vaults for V4? What about the new liquidation engine? Where does it go from here? Mark Zeller explicitly asked, is it safe to expect another large DAO revenue stream will be lost in favor of V4? That's the fear. Not that this one change is catastrophic, but that it's the beginning of a pattern. Now, let's steelman the other side and get Aave Labs' perspective. Aave Labs isn't some random bad actor. They've built Aave from nothing and have been shipping for 8 years. Stani responded to this directly. His framing: the old Paraswap setup created occasional surplus, and that surplus was then donated to the treasury. Note that word. Donated, not shared, not owed. That's important to take in mind here. He said on Twitter, this was never a fee switch. It's been a surplus always that we've donated to the DAO. And in the forum, it could have been refunded to users or gone to Aave Labs, given it's not a protocol-related feature. It simply swaps on the Aave Labs application. So he's making the philosophical argument that's really important and worth considering. The DAO should fund protocol development, not application development. And these are separate things. If the DAO funds the main interface, it actually creates barriers for other builders. That less competition means less innovation. Stani makes a good point. If Aave Labs is able to succeed, then others will build products too and scale the protocol. That's what actually matters for token holders: growth and revenue over time. Here's a harder question the community needs to wrestle with. Can DAOs actually ship competitive products? Every product decision becomes a governance proposal. Every pivot requires token holder consensus. Fast-moving opportunities can die in form threads while competitors execute. If Aave had been governed purely as a DAO from day one, would it have survived? The thing that makes Aave valuable, the security, the user experience, 8 years of continuous improvement, was built by a team with startup-level autonomy, not built by committee. And running a production DeFi interface is genuinely expensive. Front-end engineers, back-end DevOps, security audits, 24/7 monitoring, they've been eating that cost for 8 years without asking the DAO to pay. So their position is, we'd rather monetize optional features than become dependent on DAO grants, which, as a builder in DAO ecosystems myself, I really can sympathize with. It's very hard to build in ecosystem. The real questions here are, who's right? And the answer is, well, kind of both and kind of neither. Because this isn't really about whether Aave Labs violated an agreement, it's that there was no agreement. And that's the problem. This surfaces 4 deeper questions most DAOs have never explicitly answered. One is, where does the protocol end and the product begin? Aave Labs says everything on-chain is protocol and everything off-chain is product. But the interface is how users interact with Aave. The brand brings them there. The trust was built by years of not getting hacked. So 2, what if founding teams owe their DAOs? Aave Labs isn't just any service provider. They're the original team. Does that create special obligations, or are they just another vendor once the protocol is decentralized? 3, can DAOs actually build competitive products? If they can't ship fast or retain top talent, maybe they need private companies to do product work. But then, what's the DAO actually for? And who's going to pay these private companies? 4, how should protocol adjacent value be shared? Lending interest goes to the DAO. That's clear. But swap fees, front-end monetization, data products, right now, whoever captures it keeps it. That might mean protocols become commodities while margin accrues to application layer operators. So, lessons for everyone. For founding teams, you really need to define that relationship early. The time to decide what protocol versus product is before there's millions on the line. Write it down, get it ratified, or be clear when the DAO is launched or governance is launched. If you're going to monetize the interface, maybe you should say so from day one. If you're donating surplus, clarify it's a donation, not a commitment. And these are relevant questions, right? Other teams, such as Uniswap and the recent unification proposal, they're going to have to deal with questions like this themselves. They've actually gone so far as to say that the front end and the labs team aren't going to capture any value, and that actually all the protocol fees are going to go back into the protocol itself. You also really have to look forward to communicating before, not after. Even if you have the right to make a change, it's really important to announce it and be transparent. The trust damage from surprise often exceeds the actual impact. And indeed, sometimes in DAOs, we are forced to over-communicate. It's a really delicate balance. And, we've seen that firsthand, how difficult it is to find the right way of communicating. If you communicate too much, sometimes there's bad actors in the space that nitpick apart even the smallest thing, and that drives a lot of energy and time away from building product. If you don't communicate enough, then you're seen as being aloof or not really aligned with interests. Maybe DAOs actually need, or protocol teams or lab teams, they need dedicated investor relation tooling and investor relations teams to actually keep the DAO informed. But also the DAO needs to grow up and be a very mature organization with structured and properly operating participants. Many organizations suffer with participants that don't necessarily have skin in the game and don't necessarily understand the complexities of operating. That's not to speak to Aave, but just in general, it's something that a struggle that many communities experience. So for DAOs, don't rely on goodwill. If a revenue stream matters, you should formalize it. Put it in governance proposals. Make it contractual. That way it's clear. They've always done it this way is not really a strategy. It's hope, and hope's not really enforceable. Also, as time goes on and different participants come in, things that were maybe understood earlier in the practice or earlier in the business might become things that are no longer norms. For example, if you've been donating the revenue, pause. For DAOs, don't rely on goodwill. If a revenue stream matters, formalize it. In fact, you should probably formalize most things. Put it in a governance proposal, make it contractual, ratify it. Or when you're launching an organization, be straightforward and say, this is how things are going to be done, so that it's a norm that people understand and expect. They've always done it this way, really isn't long-term going to be a great strategy. It's a hope, but hopes are not enforceable. And again, as participants in these organizations change, we can run into situations where people don't really understand why things happen the way they do, and they feel the surprise is actually a kind of betrayal. For the industry, we need better frameworks, standard templates for service provider agreements, clear definitions of IP ownership and monetization rights, boring legal stuff that separates sustainable organizations from, ticking time bombs. So here's my honest take. Aave Labs isn't wrong. They've built something valuable. They've never explicitly promised to share this revenue. They have legitimate costs and a reasonable desire for autonomy. But the DAO isn't wrong either. Years of consistent behavior created expectations. The brand that makes Aave.com valuable wasn't built by Aave Labs alone. The real failure here? Nobody defined the relationship when it was easy. Now they're trying to define it with money on the table and emotions running. This will happen to every successful protocol eventually. The teams that build them need sustainable business models. The communities that govern them expect to benefit. These interests will always exist in attention. The projects that will thrive will face this honestly. Have hard conversations early, put agreements in writing, build governance that can involve. Projects that will fail will assume alignment, rely on goodwill, and discover too late that vibes are not a governance framework. If you're building something decentralized, take note. The ambiguity you leave unresolved today becomes the conflict you're forced to resolve tomorrow at much greater stakes. And by then, it'll be a lot more expensive. Well, that's it for this one. Drop a comment with your take. Is Aave Labs justified? Is the DAO overreacting? Or is this just the inevitable growing pains of decentralization? So I'm Dennison Bertram, co-founder and CEO here at Tally.xyz, and I'll see you in the next one.